are going to talk about the trials of life and the character that we're building along the way. We're going to hit on 5 distinguishing features of good report that can be produced and how to tap into them. I believe beautiful people aren't just made. Generally, life experiences shape us into who we are. Years ago, a dear friend of mine delivered me a package with a shadow box along with a little written note of encouragement. What was inside still sits on my shelf in my office, and I reflect on it and the truth within it quite often. It reads this: "The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and deep, loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen." This is attributable to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Many of you may be familiar with her work around grief and the Kubler-Ross model that illustrates that grief cycle as having the 5 distinct parts, including denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and lastly, acceptance. As I reflect back on the story that I'm going to share with you today, I can see all 5 of them showing up and coming back through different seasons in this last more than 20 years of my life. Just yesterday, I was talking to a friend who works with first responders and military who suffer with PTSD. She was sharing the story of a recent combat veteran that reached out after the sudden loss of his brother to suicide. In the story, she shared with me that he talked about his brother's suicide and expressed that he had many moments where he had felt that same despair, that he had felt that he couldn't go on. But in those moments, he held it together for one purpose, and that was his children. The story instantly brought a memory to mind of what I define as the worst day of my life. July 24th, 1997 was a day where my life was forever changed. I never saw things the same again, and I will tell you earnestly that I narrowly escaped my own pain and suffering. There were a whole lot of days in the depths of my despair that I didn't want to continue on. When will I forget? Never. You know those days, right? Those days where moments are seared in your mind that you can't wish or will away. They're so incredibly painful and will forever be a part of your story. The one of them that got me again yesterday was my friend, as she was telling me about this combat veteran and his will to live coming through his children, was the memory of coming home from the hospital on that July day to my sweet, innocent 5-year-old little girl who looked up at me with her huge brown eyes and her excited smile, sweetly asking, "Mommy, where's my baby?" She had been looking forward to this new baby coming home for months. His nursery was ready. I can still see it vividly in my mind today. The diapers were stacked. His mobile was hung. Dozens of tiny little pieces of clothing were folded perfectly in their drawers awaiting his arrival home. And I had to tell her that her baby wasn't coming home. He was in heaven. My beautiful, perfect 5-pound, 11-ounce baby boy with a full head of black hair was welcomed to his permanent home that day. I don't know why he couldn't stay with us, but I do take comfort in knowing that one day we will be reunited. I believe it with my whole heart. I am so grateful for his life. I'm grateful that the lessons that I've learned as a result of his death. And I'm most grateful for the way in which God has used me and Brandon's life and death to walk alongside other hurting mamas over the years. Grief is a really funny thing, and the loss of a child is torturous. I am not going to call it anything less than that. As far as I'm concerned, it's pure hell, and it has changed me. Hear me. And it has changed me for the better. I often find my mind wandering through, what could have been, what wouldn't have been, and reflecting on our family and how differently things might have turned out if he wouldn't have died. It's not about regrets or wishing for things to be different. It's actually quite the opposite. I always find my way to a place of gratitude for what we do have and what has become of this crazy, beautiful, amazing gift of life. You see, my precious son Brandon's life radically altered mine without question. Walking through that season was certainly one of the most difficult battles of my life. And while I have experienced other loss, I count this as my greatest. I can remember feeling absolutely no hope and not wanting to continue on. As that combat veteran mentioned, I don't know that I would have continued on without my other two children and some messengers I believe God sent to me during that time. Through Brandon's life and death, I've learned deeper faith, compassion, perseverance, humility, and love. I've learned that in the darkest of days, we need to keep going, and there will be light. It's not always pretty, and I am so imperfect, but God, He is greater than our highs and lows, and you are never alone. I am weak, but He is powerful, and His grace is sufficient. But He said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me." That's 2 Corinthians 12:19. His grace is sufficient for you, and His power shines in our weakness. My daily reading plan this week has been largely focused around the life of Joseph, and it's had me thinking about his life and the lives of many others that have been filled with trials and blessings. I love what Joseph says to his brothers after the death of his father when they feared for their lives. He said this, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. That's in Genesis 50:15. That is absolutely awesome to me. I often find myself considering and praying against a hardened heart, because the trials of lives and the way that we can get knocked around, they can bring that in, right? Joseph could have killed them. He could have cut them off from all support. He had choices, and he chose to see God's hand and trust his faithfulness. He chose to see the work of God through the many trials he encountered through this journey of becoming, before he became the Lord of all of Egypt. He chose to see that God used him to save the lives of many through the gifts that he gave to them. You see, I don't believe that God caused Brandon to die. I do believe that God rescued me from my suffering and has shown me repeatedly how sharing my story has been a benefit to others. It has produced a different heart in me. Over time, if we open our hearts and minds to being transformed, he will do a work in us that will produce the character that he calls us to. One of compassion, of kindness, of humility, of gentleness, and of patience. What are your trials producing in you? The first step towards seeing those 5 features show up in your world is to lay those trials down and trust that he will rescue you. If you haven't heard it, look up the song Rescue by Lauren Daigle and listen to that. Its message is beautiful and so very true. In it, she sings, "I will send out an army to find you. In the middle of the darkest night, it's true. I will rescue you." There's a psalm that sounds an awful lot like that, Psalm 91:14. "Because he loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue him. I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name." Acknowledge him, friends. Give it over to him. He will send out an army to find you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. You're not alone. You are deeply loved, and whatever battle you're fighting, good can come from it. Just keep going.